Welcome, welcome, welcome. So I've been kicked out of my office today here, and I am in one of my other offices, a little supply room here. But cool. Regardless, still we'll get going. And wanted to discuss the DoorDash breach, and how that basically how that's all going to play out from a counterintelligence standpoint, as well as a couple of other spots. I think there's a big piece with cyber stalking there. As well as a couple of others, right? And wanted to kind of walk through some of maybe the unseen, less reported kind of stuff there, right? So, very quickly, for those who aren't following the breach, or some of the, and by the way, too, if you're in, excuse me, if you're in the chat room, have a question at any point, feel free to drop a question in, and I'll try to get that answered. So, anyway. As we talk about DoorDash, for those that aren't aware of what occurred, yesterday DoorDash announced that they've discovered a breach. They said that attackers had access to data from basically as far back as May, and there's a lot of details around that. They published a blog post, and certainly we have access to that blog post. I encourage you to read it, but they do mention a couple of things, right? One, that they did actually salt passwords. So I think that's probably a critical, or at least reasonably worthwhile thing to note, right? Passwords were salted, and of course we know that's best practices, but that doesn't always happen, right? So best practices versus did it actually occur? Those are often two different things. Anyway, as we talk about DoorDash, the big thing that I kind of noted was the fact that they have your order history and delivery addresses. And so what I got to thinking about here a little bit was, how could that data be abused, right? How could delivery address data be abused? And one of the immediate things, now, for those that don't know, I think it's pretty widely public knowledge, particularly after the Shadow Brokers breach, that I used to work in intelligence, and so one of the things that I certainly think about a lot are counterintelligence issues, right? For those that aren't aware with counterintelligence and what is it, counterintelligence is basically the study of how do you do intelligence on the intelligence collectors, right? So and oftentimes that may be as well, how do you deny them intelligence, right? Other folks that are doing intel, how do you deny them intel? But here I think I'm more specifically talking about slides and audio are not up yet, right? I hear Michael says slides and audio not up yet. Is anybody else hearing audio? Test, test. Just my pretty face. Well, that's not good. Michael says he can hear me. Audio, yes. I can hear. Okay, good to go. Okay, so somebody doesn't have, there are no slides, right? Okay, good to go. Yeah, no, we're not doing slides. I mean, I would love to have put together slides for this, but I have multiple incidents going on. That's why I got kicked out of my office, because they're on a call with another one there. Brandon is on a call with another incident victim. And so anyway, so I want to come back around now that I've confirmed. Yeah, the short is I don't have slides for this, right? So it's literally just kind of walking through some of the the implications here. So as far as the implications go, one of my big things that I'm really worried about here are the delivery addresses, right? And I start to think about some of the things you can do with these right now. The one thing that I thought about immediately were what we so-called black sites, right, or cover sites that are not publicly attributed back to the intelligence community, right? So whatever those happen to be, or if you prefer to think about like an FBI safe house, right? Where might basically an FBI or other Department of Justice, U.S. Marshals, Witness Protection, you name it, those kind of safe houses, right? Now, obviously, the location of those are highly sensitive and should definitely be kept secret as much as possible. And one thing that we that we run into here with food delivery is I'd like to believe, right, in most cases that Intel community members are not getting food delivered directly to black sites. I'd like to believe that, right? I don't necessarily know that that's the case, but let's assume that it is for a moment, right? Let's assume that they are practicing decent OPSEC Yeah, I saw somebody log in here as a CIA officer one, and of course says we have to eat, right? That is a reality, and I want to come back to that. I'll talk a little about Dunkin' Donuts here in a few minutes, and how they burned not an intel operation, but an incident response in the past, right? And so you're right. At the end of the day, and this is something that we brief every one of our clients about, as we're doing incident response prep. We do a lot of incident response gap analysis, right? So that during the IR, we don't deal with as much coulda, woulda, shouldas, right? Can we figure out some stuff up front that's going to help us down the road and prevent issues down the road? And so, anyway, as kind of we think about this, are people ordering directly to these black sites? Well, first off, if you've got all this DoorDash data, how would you even know who these particular people are? Well, look, it's no secret that Facebook lost, like just millions of phone numbers that were tied to email addresses that were tied to in real life accounts that have social networking data around, literally who we're all tied to right now. Even if you didn't know that a particular person, and I always find the intel community to be phenomenally awesome here with, like there are lots of people who are like super like, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook, but just barely, and I've got my profile locked down and I only communicate with my friends. And it's like neat. What you're doing there effectively is it's almost like when you've got people with burner phones that only call each other, right? And it's like, yeah, my burner phone only ever calls these other 8 burner phones. What you have there effectively is a closed network, right? And once you have data, right, to find these closed networks. And so that's a really interesting piece there, right? As you start looking at, that. Excuse me. So anyway, that's a big one for us to go look at, right? Is the basically like the intel community folks kind of tied to one another, even if you haven't been outed directly, right? There's enough data out there to start piecing together, like you're tied to this other person whose data is tied to this DoorDash account, and I certainly hope that the U.S. government this morning is doing it, and preferably yesterday too, but definitely this morning is doing some analysis of that, right? Doing some analysis of the basically the what do we need to do? What's our exposure here? Are there safe houses or black sites that we need to monitor more, shut down? I don't know, right? So that's a really interesting piece of that. Again, if they're getting food delivered directly, yes. If they're getting food delivered to nearby locations, it's pretty easy to start geofencing, right? I've certainly had spots in the past, like for instance, Sands most often has contracts with the hotels that say we shouldn't get, like particularly the instructors shouldn't get food delivered directly to the, basically they want you to eat their catered or they're super expensive in the hotel, stuff. I've had food delivered to a next door, literally to the address next door, so bring it to the lobby or whatever, right? And so again, if all of those delivery addresses are basically being cached and are in the data that was dumped, and DoorDash does say the delivery addresses are there and your order history is there, that's a big thing, right? Somebody mentioned here, Red in the chat mentioned something that I was definitely going down as well. We were definitely going to discuss, and that's your food preferences, right? There are some people that have some very, very specific food preferences. Some of those are religious, some of those are ethnic. For instance, if I personally do not find Ukrainian food to be phenomenally tasty, right? And if you're Ukrainian, by all means, say that for whatever it's worth. I don't find it to be that way. I think even most people that appreciate Ukrainian food, in the U.S., most likely would like to have it maybe once in a blue moon, not on a consistent basis is kind of the go-to there. But if we turn around then and we take a look at somebody who is consistently ordering from, or a group of people consistently ordering from and ordering from these Ukrainian restaurants, let's say, is just as an example of an ethnic type of food, or ethnic, regional, whatever you want to call it there, type of food, and saying, okay, let's go ahead and go grab this Ukrainian food, and consistently we have deliveries of a particular food type to a consistent address. What does that say about how that address is being used? Could that actually be a foreign safe house? Right now, up to this point, I've been talking about kind of like the, oh my gosh, right, U.S. implications of this, right? By the way, FBI counter intel, I hope you're linked into, actually, no, never mind. I hope you're not linked into this data. I have a sneaking suspicion maybe that you are already anyway, but whatever. You could use this to go find foreign safe houses, right? operating inside the U.S. potentially, right? Or at least get a good start. Now, as far as that kind of widespread dragnet goes, we saw a case Thomas Brewster broke 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, it was basically during DerbyCon, Friday at DerbyCon, broke the news that what's the name of the company? I can't remember the name of the scope company, but basically these folks that manufacture a rifle scope. They have an app that you can use to take video from the rifle scope, right? And I'm not going to get the Second Amendment side of this because it's not relevant. But what I will say is that the Department of Justice filed under seal, right, trying to make sure that nobody could see it. They filed under seal for Google Play Store and Apple to basically release all records of everyone who downloaded an application. And they didn't just want the download list, right? They said if a person downloaded this application for this rifle scope, we also want all of their identifiers, their IP addresses, session times, and not just around the application, period. Like the fact that you downloaded that app at any point puts you on the target list. And then from there, they want every piece of data that you had. It's not inconceivable, right? Coming back to this whole, like, let's say Ukrainian restaurant, right? Let's say, for instance, that Ukrainian restaurant itself, let's say they could look on DoorDash and say, or Uber Eats or whatever it happens to be there, and possibly under seal, for all we know, could have also submitted a subpoena for, and say, give us all the data for any address that is ordered and all the identifiers around those addresses. But any address that's ordered from this restaurant more than let's say 5 times in a calendar month, or whatever the threshold happens to be, or it could be literally everything, right? So that's an interesting take on that, right? So a lot of counter intel kind of side there around the both looking for people that looking for black sites. Again, once I've identified a couple of intelligence officers and through social networking, I can identify a whole lot more. And bear in mind, even if people have great OPSEC while they're doing a job, once they leave, they may well post and say, "Oh yeah, I used to work over here, here, or here," right? Or they may be outed by somebody, whatever the case happens to be, and again, have that as part of their threat model. Not everybody linked to them potentially is linked in there as well. Total Freudian slip there, and I said is linked into them, but that is, I guess really when it comes down to it, that is part of what we do with social network analysis and OSINT, right? We talked a little about black sites. Let's talk about contractors and incident response, right? My company Rendition frequently does incident response. Like I mentioned, that's why I'm sitting in what is more of a supply/lab room than anything else, and not my regular office, right? Because they're on a big IR call over there in the basically a big incident response call over there in the office, right? Rock on, happy about that. But we go do a lot of on-site IR. A number of years ago, we actually got outed by Dunkin' Donuts, and this was it's a phenomenal thing. We always tell the folks that are basically set up basically the folks that are doing incident response. We always tell them, like, hey, if we're going to be on site for any period of time, and if you've had a long-running incident response, I'm not talking about one of these 1 or 2 day kind of things, right? It's one of these, we detected it after the attackers have been in the network for years, and we're really doing a big network security overhaul and that kind of thing. As these investigations drag out, days into oftentimes a couple of weeks or more, this becomes it becomes a piece of a threat model as far as for who knows that you're changing your patterns, right? And somebody mentioned here earlier, we got to eat, right? And you do, right? Napoleon famously said, "An army moves on its stomach." Incident responders are no different. We always tell people that one of your best case scenarios, right, is rotating through, pick a support staff person, right, and go get them to go get food, and we will cycle through where we're getting food. But we're going to get that brought in for the different employees. Absent that, right, what typically happens is people will either go to the places immediately nearby, changing up their patterns as well, or in some cases they will order from the same places consistently. And so we were doing an incident response a number of years ago, and this has been, gosh, I guess 5-ish years ago now, 4 years, something like that. And in downtown, and I'll leave out which city because it doesn't matter. But we had to park almost 5 blocks away from the actual entrance to the high rise that we were, that the company we're working with operates in. That was the closest they could give us. Now they had closer parking garages. Let's be clear about this, right? But they couldn't figure out how to free up even, you know, 1 space, 2 spaces of what they had. They're like, oh no. Now, mind you, even on the weekends, the vast majority of that's open, but still no badges, whatever. I don't care about a 5-block walk. Game on. I need my steps anyway. I got to get the good Fitbit steps in there and rock on. But as I walk into Dunkin' Donuts on Sunday, this woman, as I go swipe my card there, I got a good old sausage, egg, and cheese sandwich, and she's like, or no, not a croissant sandwich, that's Burger King, but you know, same deal, croissant, right? And business partner grabs a coffee and a tea, maybe something, I don't remember. Anyway, she says, I know who you are. I'm like, well, good, that's great. We've been coming in here a while, right? And I'm trying to like play this off cool, right? I'm like, it's cool, yeah, coming in here a while, and I have been. It's like every day, right? They refused per their corporate policy. They didn't want us to go cater food in. And per their corporate policy, our incident response employees could absolutely buy and get reimbursed for food, but their employees could not, and we couldn't buy food for them, and you name it, right? It was just this weird whatever. And so they had employees like walking out all the time, whatever. Anyway, this Dunkin' Donuts on a Sunday in a downtown, right? There's a lot of stuff. Most big downtown cities, the majority of the stuff is closed, right? They operate on business times, right? But Sunday morning, Dunkin' Donuts is open, I think from like, I don't know, 7 to 2 in the afternoon or something like that. And anyway, so we went in there and grabbed the stuff. She's like, I know who you are. And I've worn one of my shirts in there a couple of times. It doesn't really bother me to do that. And it's not really, we thought a lot about this since, right? Because it can be an OPSEC issue, right? To actually have a company polo on. And it turns out it was there, right? And she had Googled who we were. And I wasn't wearing a company polo that day, but it doesn't really matter. You know, this clerk at Dunkin' Donuts, right, was set there, and she follows. She says, first off, she's like, you know, like, hey, I know who you are, and I said, neat, and then she's like, and I know what you do, and I said, okay, cool, right, you know, I'm Googleable, so cool. But she's like, and then she said the words, and I'll never forget this. She said, and blah has a breach, right? And blah was the company name we're actually responding to a breach for. And that was non-public. And she got my attention right there. We went directly to Pucker Factor 8. And I said, I'm clearly not going to confirm that or deny that. I said, but what makes you think that? And she says, well, I followed you out yesterday. And I'm like, okay, that's stalker level 8, right? Kind of thing going on there. Because it is, right? But she did, right? Because the reality is I'm walking 5-ish blocks, right, to get from, and it turns out that she walks out the Dunkin' Donuts there, and Dunkin' Donuts sitting in a corner, kind of on a corner there. If she walks out and takes 3 steps, she can literally watch us walk the last 2 blocks after we turn the corner there. Walk the last 2 blocks and walk into that high rise. And that's exactly what she did. And she said, hey, I looked at who's in there, and there's really only 2 people in that high rise, or 2 companies in that high rise. That would really have the kind of pull to have you and, you know, X number of your employees that I've seen come in and out of here, or people with you, shouldn't say employees, right? But you and these people that have been with you consistently. There's only 2 of us today, but previously there have been 5, you know, one day. And anyway, this is great detective work that she did to put this together. And this is us just frequenting an establishment too often, right? Mind you, this is her doing that analysis. Yeah, somebody asked, did I hire her? I moved between I moved between wanting to hire her for her analysis abilities and wanting to like go, you stalk her, get a restraining order kind of thing, right? We did put Dunkin' Donuts on the no list at that point, right? Like the don't touch that kind of list, right? Domino's figured out the same thing a couple of days later. A Domino's driver, and this comes right back to the delivery side, right? He, it turns out, had not been, this is pattern analysis at its best. It 100% is, right? The particular Domino's driver had only been his 2nd delivery there, but back at Domino's, right, they had discussed how weird it was that, and again, this is stuff that you may not be thinking about, right? But it turns out Domino's in this particular city was one of the last places that delivered, right? So as every place else is shutting down, they're one of the last, and everybody's got a last. I mean, every city has this place for this address is the last place that'll deliver. And if you've worked some of those late night incident responses, right, and you may be pulling an overnight shift or whatever, you know when it gets to be that time, right? Whether it's midnight or, you know, whether it's, you know, if the last delivery is 11 p.m., right? You have to have the order in by 11. You know, 10:45, right? There's a Are we working tonight? Are we ordering something? Because you're going to, it's like, do it now or it's not going to happen, right? And Domino's noted that they had never delivered. One of the Domino's folks noted that they had never delivered over there because it's a high rise. It's a downtown high rise, right? Past whatever, I don't know what it was, past 8 p.m. The guy went back and checked their records, right? Again, this is the kind of thing you step back and you look at DoorDash and the data available there with DoorDash. What kind of interesting stuff could you, in retrospect, put together there? Right? If you have somebody with a, and again, this is stuff that we've really taken a hard look at. DoorDash is going to make us take a harder look at what is it that we need to protect from an OPSEC perspective, right? Because, again, I look at the Domino's side, and the Domino's guy didn't say, and you have a breach, but he said, hey, as I go down to go sign for the pizzas, he says, man, so I don't know what you guys got going on up there, but things sure have changed over the last couple of weeks, haven't they? And it's like, man, I oscillate between wanting to go, dude, you are an awesome analyst. Although apparently this one was, as I asked, it was a group effort back at Domino's. But you're an awesome analyst, to the wow, stalker, get out of my mind kind of thing, right? So again, as I bring DoorDash back into this and think about, like all the data that they have, imagine if you've got this data. And to my knowledge, the DoorDash data has not been dumped. I haven't seen it available for sales, right? Yeah, so we don't know what was exfilled versus what was just access. CI Officer 1 notes that names, dates, addresses for deliveries, and it takes a leap, right? He says that takes a leap. I'm not sure what you mean by that takes a leap. The bottom line is we don't know what was accessed, right? Or sorry, we don't know what was exfiltrated versus what the attackers had access to. And I'm going to be straight up here, and I'm going to tell you, I don't think DoorDash does either, right? I think DoorDash knows what was in the system. But remember that DoorDash earlier this year, there were complaints. And in fact, Zach Whitaker wrote an article. Yeah, we don't know what the attackers got. And to that point, again, I don't think DoorDash does either. I'm not, and I don't think that's much of a leap. Yeah, some folks note it's just like 95% of breaches where we don't know what they had. We know they had access to, we don't know what they took. Right. And again, this one's going to be a fascinating case study. And I do want to kind of rotate around to that. Now, I guess is as good a time as ever. This is going to be a fascinating case study for incident response and how we handle security anyway, because, well, for a number of reasons. But I think DoorDash will end up being, something that gets talked about in a lot of InfoSec courses around incident response. And one of the reasons for this, basically one of the reasons that I look at this is that they had complaints of DoorDash customers saying, hey, my account was compromised earlier this year. And in fact, it was either late April or early May, I think it was, Zach Whitaker at TechCrunch wrote an article about this and contacted DoorDash for comment. And they said, no, it's just password stuffing, right? We've investigated, we've heard the complaints, it's just password stuffing. Obviously DoorDash heard the complaints if a journalist has heard the complaints too. But Zach followed up with a number of people who said, no, in my case, it can't be password stuffing. It can't be. For those that aren't aware, password stuffing is where attackers take passwords from one dump and then go use those with the same email address, phone number, whatever, trying to gain access to another account, right? So this is the why you don't use the same password across multiple sites. Well, multiple people that Zach talked to said, no, I use a password manager, and as a result, I'm using a unique password, right? Using a unique password there across basically across all. Basically across the site, and my account was compromised, right? But yeah, I'll mention here that somebody in the chat, and I won't throw the name out here because I don't know if she wants that, but says threat model, or if they want that. Threat model is a bit different because that them presenting on the internet, very concerned about delivery addresses and names being accessed or exfilled. Yeah, absolutely, right? And so let's rotate back to the individual concern here. Because well, I think there's a lot of concern. I don't know if there's any specific, one or two, but as we start talking about, this whole privacy side, getting out of the counter intel and the what kind of operations could we reconstruct, whether those are incident response or infrastructure upgrade or internal investigation, whatever. We have extra staff on site. Let's also think about privacy concerns for stalkers, etc. Now, Scott mentions in the chat, sounds like they failed to adequately hash the passwords. That's actually not the case, right? So they say that although a spokesperson yesterday would not confirm what hashing algorithm was used, they did indeed hash the passwords and salted them. So that's DoorDash's official comment, that they hash and salt the passwords. I don't know that that's an issue, though, because from a credential stuffing standpoint, what they're doing is using passwords from a previous breach and reusing them over, let's say, DoorDash. Now, again, we know that's today. We know that's not what happened, right? Now, of course, have you ever tried to enter a password on a phone? That's why it happens. Yeah, look, people use bad passwords specifically because of mobile, man. I totally get it. And, you know, a lot of our password, or some of our password managers don't operate very effectively with mobile. There are other people who say password managers, you know, increase your risk because they do increase the attack surface. There's no question there. But let's suppose for a moment that you're the victim of, or have been the victim of, cyber stalking in the past, right? Or let's say tomorrow that we rotate in and, you know, we've got this issue with I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good scenario here. Let's say the winds of politics in the U.S. change, and we are looking to target a particular group. Now, we could say that we would never do that, but of course, don't forget about the Japanese internment camps during World War II. Let's also not pretend that after 9/11 that we didn't persecute. Persecute may be a strong word, but let's say that there wasn't some anti-Muslim sentiment, let's just say, in the U.S. I think it's a reality that there was. And so if you've got this data, right, and it's not just think about how the data could be used today, but think about how the data could be used in the future, right, as well. And so this has been a real, I'll tell you, for me at least, the DoorDash compromise here, I think, has been a real eye-opener as I got to thinking about if I were still back in intelligence, how would I use this data from a targeting standpoint? Right. And again, I'm not just thinking signals intelligence. I'm thinking about the whole range of intelligence operations. How would I use this data for targeting? Again, you know, as I think about that, I'm right back to the trying to track down safe houses, seeing who orders to the same locations. Right. Let's say, for instance, that you have great operational security, or good operational security at least, and let's say you've decided that you're only going to order to, you know, the gas station down the street. Right. Okay, neat. But let's say then that there are 6 people that do that rotate through the safe house, 6 officers that rotate through the safe house, and ultimately use that basically use that same delivery address, or at least rotate through that as one of their delivery addresses. Let's say that down the road, with those 6 intel officers, one of them leaves the intelligence services, and let's say becomes a talking head on CNN, and it says former CIA officer, whoever, right? And if you've got that DoorDash data today, man, that is a treasure trove of data, because you go back and look at, hey, where did dude ever get stuff delivered to? And then you step back and you're like, no, why did these other 5 people also get stuff delivered to this gas station in wherever, right? Or you name it. Again, meet me in the lobby, meet me in the whatever, right? And so, again, as we look at that, that's a really interesting thing to start putting together, because one, what's happening here effectively is, right, that this OPSEC, right, even though Joe may have practiced great OPSEC while he was in the services, as he rotates out, you know, this now can create a problem, even if we haven't identified specifically where the safe house is, right? You know, again, we may be spotting into the whole, like, hey, here's 5 other people that we didn't previously know about, but they all are tied together by this. This link analysis we teach in the, you know, in the cyber threat intelligence course over at SANS, and again, is something that intelligence services are without a doubt doing. The link analysis is a go-to for basically a go-to for, well, for doing analysis, I guess is the way to say it there. So another thing that we haven't really touched on yet too are affairs, right? You know, there are people who obviously engage in extramarital affairs, or you know, want to hide their activities, right? And you know, I remember in a legal case a number of years ago, somebody's Uber history actually becoming was it Uber or rideshare? I can't remember. A rideshare history became actually critical, where it became a question of who knew what when, and when's the first time you engaged with this person. And under subpoena, they got back rideshare history. And that rideshare history showed that this individual who said, no, the first time I met this guy was blah, right, had actually taken a rideshare to his house weeks earlier. And of course, that completely resets the timeline. It completely changes, you know, the picture from an intent standpoint. Now, again, I'm talking about legal proceeding here, but of course, understand from a DoorDash side, Again, this is data that could be valuable for years, or I mean, potentially longer, right, to come. And again, a lot of folks are thinking about the credit card side of this. Yeah, okay, they only have the last 4 digits of the credit card number anyway, if we're believing everything that DoorDash understands, right? Only have the last 4 digits of the credit card number anyway. Yeah. Cyber stalkers, down with that. I can see some really interesting plays though around, like, why did you order food here and what went on, right? I can also see down the road, if this data set was exfiltrated and becomes available, private investigators are going to have a heyday with this, right? Heyday with this. And likewise, I expect you may see some additional blackmail attempts, just like we saw after the Ashley Madison breach. If you're not familiar with that, a lot of folks stuck in the Ashley Madison breach or in the Ashley Madison dump received blackmail, basically blackmail requests where they were told, hey, if you're not down with, or if you don't want your data being exposed and the fact that you're in this dump, and Ashley Madison, a lot more data, like kinks that you were into and whatnot. But again, if you don't want that exposed, then here you go, right? Pay up. Or now, of course, the thing was amazing was people would say pay up will remove you from the database, right? Like the data is already out there, right? So anyway, as far as some of the other data, around, or as far as some of the other ways that might be abused, certainly, if you were, and I'm thinking now less about like, hey, you've got a breach, but kind of like the moving forward, right? Because it's neat to talk about like what happened, and I think we've done that, right? I do want to circle back actually, and I'll close with OPSEC recommendations down the road, but I do want to circle back around to the previous April-May time frame when DoorDash had reports that their systems have been hacked, right? And I say reports that people's accounts were being used illicitly, right? And so, the reason I think this is going to be such a fascinating case study as we roll forward is, how do you know when to call the all clear, right? How do you know when to call the all clear? We certainly have run, as has any incident response company, we have worked with people who have said, the investigation is done, and you've looked and said the investigation is not done, right? There's other data to look at. It's likely to provide additional information around how the attackers got in. The attackers may still be in the network, and we may not know those kind of things, because there's this whole chunk over here that we haven't yet looked at, right? We haven't yet collected data from, and we need to do that before we close the incident out. And if you've worked in incident response for any period of time, sometimes people say, no, we're not doing that, right? We're done, you're done, right? We're going to go and wrap this up, put a bow on it, and if there's still attackers over there, that'll be incident number 2 or whatever. And they just accept that risk, right? I wonder to what extent that happened with DoorDash, right? We don't yet have the details about how they called the all clear in April and May. I'm sure lawyers are going to get those details. I have no question in my mind that down the road, at least in closed legal proceedings, those details are going to come out. I hope that they come out to the public, because again, I think it's going to be a fascinating case study. A lot of questions I have involve, did they involve a third party, right, at all? If so, who? What was the scope of the third party investigation, and at what point did you decide to call the all clear, right? That's number 4. And then my number 5 here, my critical number 5, is, at what point did you decide to put additional monitoring or retention of logs in place, right? And I think that those are 5 critical questions that are going to have to be answered by DoorDash down the road. Just like any of these breaches, regulators are going to come to take a look at, PCI definitely, right? What do you have? What did you have? Et cetera. They're not just going to like take their word on it kind of thing generally, but we'll see. But I'd like to know, like, what was the criteria by which was it all internal? Is there a third party? If there was a third party, what's the scope? But again, I think it's going to be a fascinating case here, because we do run into near misses, right? A few times a year, the 800 number rings back here at the office, and we go kick off an incident response and find out there is no incident, right? And basically the thing that precipitated whatever that is, the thing that precipitated that incident or the incident response call basically is explained elsewhere besides it being an incident, right? So I think that's going to be an interesting, like, how do we certainly internally, we're going to take a hard look at, especially when data is available, right, around this, or if data is available around this, we'll take a hard look at, do our processes ensure that this wouldn't happen to us, right? I will tell you that, when we have one where the client says, hey, you need to stop looking, and we say, no, we should absolutely be continuing to look, we recommend continuing to look. We document the heck out of that to protect ourselves legally, right? So that they don't throw us under the bus afterwards. And if they do, we literally are like, no, here's the paper. We said, keep looking because there's this big thing over here and particularly there's evidence that they may have, like we had one recently where there was evidence that the attacker actually came in through another server, and they're like, don't go look at that server. Like, well, I mean, that's not the way incident response works, but cool, right? So there was a couple of questions in the chat here, and I think that they're relevant to talk about, right? Do you think DoorDash will actually learn from this? Do most clients learn from incidents after the fact? So I'll separate those two there, right? Because the first question relies on data that we don't have, and that's around, I think when we ask, will they learn from this being the incident, again, I'm backing up to, they already had a near miss, and it doesn't seem like, I don't know. I mean, based on what I know today, based on what we know today publicly, this looks really bad, right? And the fact that there is not more monitoring or log data or any of that available to really discuss, because what's happening now, what you see in their blog post is that they are taking steps, just like everybody else who's ever been involved in a breach. We are taking steps to increase our security posture. Whoop-de-freaking-do, right? What I would like to see, and isn't in there, and I feel like if they did, it would be in the blog post, is in April, when we had this near miss, right? We stepped back and said, wow, we didn't have all the data we really wanted when we went into this investigation. This is presuming that they actually investigated in April and May and didn't just be like, it must be definitely password stuffing. I'm assuming that they did a due diligence, I am, based on what they told, to a couple of reporters, as well as, just common sense, hoping that they did some due diligence investigation. And if they didn't, now we have a whole separate issue, right? If they didn't do any due diligence there, I do think we have a whole separate issue. But I would like to know what they did in the interim to increase security, logging, and monitoring. And I think the answer there is nothing, right? And because I feel like if they had done a bunch of that, that would have been in a blog post, because it says we take security seriously, right? And when we investigated this back in May, and well, conveniently, they're trying to leave that out of the blog post right now. Zach Whitaker and others have published that and kind of noted that this is not their first brush with disaster, right? So do I think they're going to learn from it? I don't know, and I feel like the answer to that is maybe. Maybe it takes this big of a culture shock, or sorry, this big of a shock to really hit the, change the corporate culture there. Don't know, right? Second question is, do most of our clients learn from incidents after the fact? Some, right? Some do. A lot of it comes down to, is the incident recognized as something bigger than an IT problem, an IT/InfoSec problem at the executive and the board level? That's really it. And a lot of that, honest to goodness, has to do with communication. Obviously, we know how to communicate. I do it for a living. I mean, I do more communication, honestly, today than I do technical work. I love to have my hands in the tech stuff, and I get my hands in the tech stuff. But like, one of my big value adds to the company is going back and communicating with executives, right? Communicating with the business units and trying to do that, that geek speak translation into layman's terms, so they understand impact and they understand risk, right? And that really is that's a value add. If we get an audience with executives, right, typically we can help shock the corporate culture. We can help change the corporate culture, and clients learn from incidents. And we say learn from, everybody learns, right, from the incident. The real question is, are you taking action? I think that's really what that question is going towards, right? Are they taking actions to prevent that from happening again? And the answer comes down to, if we get a good executive culture change, generally there's something that's been involved with the corporate culture that leads to a lot of this. If there's not a lot of data available to investigate, again, that's really what it comes down to for us. That's been the biggest differentiator, is basically, and again, for me, it's sometimes, if it's a publicly traded company, they're looking from the top down, the board's going to vote me out. I've got an audience with executives. In other cases, if it's not a publicly traded or the executives haven't independently been like, oh snap, we really want to talk about this, a lot of it comes down to how well respected are the CISO and the CIO at the board level, right? And if they are respected at the board level, we get the right audiences and we get the right time to brief and the right questions being asked and the whole. But if they haven't already started to build that relationship ahead of time, it's really a crapshoot. Right. So as sad as that is, there's another person here that notes it's a bit of a Pascal's wager. If the IR cost sinks the ship, what's the point of making sure the hackers are out? That's a great question. And look, at the end of the day, I've talked to a lot of startups, right? We do a lot of work with startups who come to us and say, hey, we know that we need to deal with security, but we can't afford to do it right now. I want to tell you that is 2000s era thinking. It just is, right? Maybe 1990s thinking. I'm going to rotate up to maybe 2000s era thinking. But where we're at today, the problem is that security can be an existential threat. And even if it's not today, in 2019, in 2020, it absolutely will be in the US because CCPA is coming, right? The California Privacy Act is going to be there. And the regulators, I think California, I read yesterday or day before or something, spent $23 million bolstering their compliance and regulatory staff. They're serious about this, right? They are now. I want to be very clear. CCPA is horribly written legislation. It's just bad, right? And the amendments have just worked their way through and all that. But the short of it is that if the incident response costs sink the ship. Yeah, I get that. But if the incident response can turn around and stop regulatory costs from sinking the ship as frequently as happened, right? Then there is a benefit there. Right now, today, if you're in a non-regulated industry, DoorDash is not, by the way. They collect PCI data. Right? They absolutely do, right? And so I can't fathom they don't have a PCI enclave someplace. And so the regulatory cost here, may be obscene before this is all over, right? Because more and more we're seeing regulators say, when you say they didn't take anything, the regulators are saying, prove it. And if you don't have the logs, regulators are kind of like, well, what are you proving here, right? Like, give me something. You got nothing, then, in some cases, they're trying to find the full access, assuming everything got exfiltrated, right? So I do get the whole Pascal's wager thing there, right? If the IR cost sinks the ship, what's the point? Look, starting next year, it's going to be the point, right? Because whether you're in California or not, if you do business in California and you're worth more than 25 million or do more than 25 million a year in business, you're going to have to comply with CCPA. You just are, right? I mean, there's a bunch of other conditions there as well. Personal experience, a near miss gets people patted on the back. Generally, nothing happens. Everybody celebrates instead of panics. Yeah, well, that's, to that point, and I'm not reading names here only because I just privacy, right? Because this is recorded and it always gets published afterwards, or they usually get published afterwards. And so this one definitely will be. So apologize. You're like, why are you not reading my name, right? It's because I'm privacy protection there. But personal experience. Look, if a near miss gets a bunch of people patted on the back and doesn't result in action, I want to call that a leadership or a culture problem, right? I'm back to the whole, what does our culture look like and what does our leadership look like? Do they truly understand the risks and the threat overall, right? And so I think it's a pretty big note there. But kind of coming back around on the is security, because the incident response being too expensive also runs into the security being too expensive, right? We know how to do it securely, but if we do that, we can't be profitable. I'm going to argue that today, right, if you are running a service or a business, right, that you're not doing security for, and you can't be profitable if you do security the right way, then you're not profitable anyway. Security is no longer an option. It's no longer a luxury. It's none of that, right? If you can't do security and be profitable, you don't have a profitable business model, right? Now, it may be that you need to bring somebody in. Yeah, security shouldn't be expensive either, to be honest, right? That is a great point. I agree with that. Security shouldn't be that expensive to do, right? We're not talking about, by the way, I mean, some of the access to logs, NetFlow, et cetera, to be able to show what did somebody take out. We're talking about a security onion box, right? You could literally drop that in for free, right? Now, bolting security into old systems is definitely expensive and definitely difficult. This is why I want to come back to the whole startup idea, right? Where a lot of startups say, hey, I can't do security and be profitable? Well, again, that's existential, right? I get it. You have to get a minimum viable product in place, but certainly there are things to the point of person in chat there. There are things you can do early that make it easy, right? Where you've left bolt holes for security, right? Or at least left the interfaces for security, even if it's being minimally done today or whatever. I still don't agree with that, but at least it's being thought about versus the the effort, YOLO kind of thing, and maybe we'll add some security later, right? Now, somebody mentions in chat here too, they may have initially thought they had no data of value. What happened as they came about the addresses and the order history? Yeah, look, I think that it was reasonably foreseeable that order history was there and could have been accessed by attackers. But yeah, so this is a great point though about data value. We routinely hear from folks who get breached. They say, well, look, I don't have any data of value. No hacker, no nation state wants this, or no APT group is going to want my data. First off, let me just go ahead and nip that one in the bud right there, because man, some of the stuff that I went after back in the day, like, I understand. I know why I went after it, right? And I will bet you the money in my pocket that those folks did not understand and would have said the same things, or would have said my data has no intelligence value. And in fact, data does have weird intelligence value, and that's just it, right? And so one final note here. It says in general, in the app market, how important are security measures employed by apps that store more than just usernames and passwords, right? Has anybody heard of an app being denied for lack of security? Well, so, on that end, no, apps being denied for a lack of security, I don't think I've ever seen that in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. I guess what I'll mention, right, on that end is that the apps, when Apple says, hey, we've approved this app, what they mean is that the app itself doesn't violate a set of conditions that they have to get an app in the App Store. It doesn't mean that all the data on the back end is secure, right? Now, one final thing that I want to kind of close with around here, and I'll actually read this last comment in here because it is salient point. Low value data, of a high value target is still valuable data, right? And so even if you'd step back and say, listen, I mean, if I've got a high value target, right? Let's say I don't know, a phone number that's tied to a terrorist, right? Or I'm just gonna say terrorist because that people generally agree we should target terrorists, right? Let's go with that. But if you kind of step back and basically look at and say, hey, here's their phone number. Man, I would love to have audio coverage on their phone, right? I'd love to hear everything they say. I'd love to have full coverage of the phone entirely. But if all I can get is their delivery, basically their delivery from DoorDash data, I'll take that too, right? At the end of the day, because I can start mapping out their friends with that again. Who else gets food delivered here? Who gets the same stuff delivered? Like the same order patterns and whatnot. Their CII Officer 1 mentions here in the chat that strange intelligence value. You'd be shocked. No, I wouldn't be. But in general, I think folks are generally shocked by just knowing somebody's newsletter subscriptions or their Fandango usage. Or is Fandango still even a thing? Is it really? Okay, neat. Basically, like looking at these weird patterns of life type thing, right? Again, if you were going to go do a meetup, doing one in a movie theater is a great place to do that. If you know a target of interest, and then you step back and say, okay, well, who else went to the 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. matinee of this shit movie, right? That garbage movie that got horrible reviews, right? Why were these two people specifically buying tickets for that, right? Movie there that, and you can imagine you'd probably want to go see something that didn't have a ton of people there so you could talk in the middle of the movie, right? You get that kind of like, or exchange something for cover, less witnesses, etc. Anyway, I got to close this up here because I got another call starting 2 p.m. But before I close up, or as I close up, I do want to walk through just a kind of what do we do going forward? Does this change our threat model? And the short of it is yes, right? If you've ever been in a class with me, I've probably told you before that at Rendition, we regularly threat model our own stuff, right? We look and we say, what do we know this week? And it's a weekly thing for us. What do we know this week that changes the way, or should change the way we operate, that we didn't know last week, right? And I will tell you that this definitely is going to spur conversation next week about that meeting. about how do we do things differently, right? We were already bit by Dunkin' Donuts, we were bitten by Domino's. I shared that with you already. Same client, by the way. For both of those events, we've already changed the way that we do ordering there, right? And how we play with that ordering. But I'm going to step back and take a look, from the DoorDash data around, how do we, what do we do with that, with that data, assuming that there is a breach down the road, right? Could somebody, and I'll tell you that I don't think somebody can do that from DoorDash today, only because I don't use DoorDash, right? But I do use Grubhub a lot, and this is not an invitation to go hack Grubhub. Please don't do that. But I'll tell you, just because they were one of the first, and they're convenient, I think they're in more cities and whatever. I do use DoorDash a lot, and I can tell you that if somebody hacked Grubhub, and looked at my Grubhub order history, I think you could probably piece together who some of our clients are. And I think you could probably piece together, sadly, some questions at least about why were large numbers of, and several of my employees have taken the same kind of thing with Grubhub, right? And I think you could probably step back and say, well, there were multiple people there, right? Why were they there? Why were they ordering food in the middle of the night consistently, right? For a week and a half, and what wasn't disclosed, right? And so, it's definitely going to be an interesting thing for us. I've gravitated to Grubhub for a lot of reasons, and none of those matter here, right? Just convenience, honestly, right? And creatures of habit. And I can tell you, one of the things I think that's going to come out of this is probably rotation around services, right? Because I can't independently say Grubhub is more or less secure than DoorDash. I mean, at the moment, everything appears more secure than DoorDash, but certainly, down the road though, that may not be the case, right? And so, if we have multiple services available in a city, in a particular location for delivery, how do we deal with those deliveries, right? And how do we deal with basically making sure that, and again, I'm less concerned about my real time than my real time risk than I am about being able to piece stuff back together, right? Around that. I will tell you that something that I've been doing for a long time now, because I am extremely concerned about ride sharing services, is I rarely put the actual address that I'm going to in a ride share service. Rarely. Right. And again, I think it's another thing to think about, right? That back end data set, right? If they have your ride history, what are you doing there, right? So again, we're talking about food delivery now, but let's expand this back out to what is my threat model, what does my operational security need to look like around these? And again, I think it depends on what you're doing, right? If you don't care that somebody knows that you went to the Marriott Hotel at 1 p.m. in the afternoon and then left at 2:30 in the afternoon, in the middle of the city, in the middle of the workday, hey, rock on, right? Game on, good for you, right? But the alternate birthday I probably use for useless sites that don't need your real birthday. It is sort of, right. It mentions in chat here, am I like faking other information there? It's one thing to fake information on an account profile, and I know a lot of people that do that, right? But again, for me, when I'm taking a Lyft or an Uber someplace, or a rideshare in general, we'll just go ahead and say when I'm taking a Lyft someplace, the origin data can be valuable as well, 100%. Right, just knowing where you're likely to stay is as useful as knowing where you're going to go. Right, there's no question about that. Absolutely no question about that. And so, but I'll tell you, right, again, I almost always set my drop off at a different location. Well, now look, as far as where I'm likely to stay, I'll just go ahead and capitulate. I flip flop between Marriott and Hilton. Right, so there's a Marriott or a Hilton. Odds are good that I'm in one of those, and if there's an Embassy Suites, I'll just go ahead and tell you I'm probably in one of those too. I love Embassy Suites because they have that omelet bar, right? So anyway, well, no, hey, it's just reality, right? And so, and I've talked about that before. This is not like uber secret or anything. But again, as far as where we're likely to go, I really do like to change that address. And again, it purely is from an OPSEC perspective. That said, I love to get steps in, right? I've got the whole Fitbit thing going here, but as much as I like to get those steps in, no, I did not say omelet bar for breakfast in the morning. The omelets are just phenomenal in most of the Embassy Suites. So that's included with their stay, which is pretty rocking. So omelets, eggs with lots of toppings there. But yeah, so coming back around here and just to close out, again, start to think about and maybe war game this a little bit, particularly again, travelers, consultants, executives, high value targets. you know, however you want to think about this. But I would say use this if you're an InfoSec, right? Part of your job is to evangelize security, right? And maybe look at how you would use this to you know, use this this DoorDash thing that's in the news now to evangelize security to the rest of your executives and the rest of your brethren who might not be thinking about this in the same critical way that you are. I'll go ahead and take this recording and publish that this afternoon when I get off this next call here. Appreciate everybody for hanging out. There were some phenomenal comments in the chat. Thanks to everybody who participated, and peace out.